What is good, people? Welcome back to another video on 8 count. In today's video, I'm going to be giving you my picks for UFC 282. Be sure to leave yours in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It's greatly appreciated. Let's get straight into it, guys. For me, it's a bit of an interesting one, right? With Yuri Prochazka having to vacate the title and ultimately scrap his fight with Glover Teixeira. The injury, he's going to be out for quite a long time, apparently over a year. So we've got Jan Błachowicz taking on Ankalaev for the light heavyweight bout. Personally, I do feel a bit sorry for Glover. I really do think, if they would have given him a little bit more time for Ankalaev, he would be a bit of a nightmare matchup for him potentially. But we do get Jan Błachowicz taking on Ankalaev in the main event now. For me, I think it's interesting that this fight has been changed from 3 rounds to 5 rounds on very short notice. I think that actually favours Jan Błachowicz. I do think out of the two, I think they're both patient in their style and they're very sort of methodical. I do think Jan's probably got that a little bit more go in him. But we haven't really seen Ankalaev sort of tested in terms of a cardio sort of output sort of levels, I guess you could say. Other than, the Paul Craig fight, which was very grappling heavy. And he ended up getting submitted with a second left on the clock. So that was a disappointing fight for him. It also was a very long time ago. It was his first fight inside the UFC octagon. But that's always left me with questions about him. I don't know how to rate him because in terms of what you see on the eye test, he's had some performances which are definitely better than others. But in my opinion, I'd say he's a really good grappler. I think on the feet, he's very wise. He takes his time. He doesn't rush. But when he does go, he's very athletic and, very powerful in short spaces. And I think that makes him a threat for Jan Błachowicz. However, I do see, Jan on the feet probably getting the better of him. I think he's got a more well-rounded sort of set of skills. And I think he is more poised. I don't think he's going to let Ankalaev back him up to the cage and get him where he wants him. I think he's going to stand his ground pretty well. We've seen in the Israel Adesanya fight that, he's very adept to checking leg kicks or any sort of kicks. He can deal with that sort of game plan. I do think he'll shut that down for Ankalaev, and I think Ankalaev will, come with a very boxing heavy sort of style. I think Jan Błachowicz is going to get the dub. I don't know if he's going to get a finish in this fight, but I wouldn't be surprised if he could get a 4th round finish. I think Jan looked incredible in his last showing against Rakic. Obviously, the fight was a bit of a disappointing one considering the fact that Rakic picked up the injury and couldn't continue. But I thought Jan looked amazing in that fight. It was a total sort of contrast to his performance against Glover Teixeira for the title. So I do think we're going to get a much better Jan Błachowicz on the Teixeira fight, more like the Rakic fight, and I expect him to pick up a win. I'm going to go with a Jan Błachowicz 4th round finish. I think it's going to be a TKO. It's going to be interesting. The wrestling's going to play a big part, and if Ankalaev can, kind of control Jan Błachowicz on the bottom for large periods of time, it's going to be a bit scary for Jan because you saw the way that Glover kind of went through him like butter in their fight. We'll move on to the co-main event. Paddy Pimblett taking on Jared Flash Gordon. For me, I don't really like the fact that this is the co-main event. I think this is, purely for ticket sales and pay-per-view sale. Not so much ticket sales, but pay-per-view. I would understand if Paddy was in the top 15 or on the verge of breaking into the top 15, but he's nowhere near that at the moment, so I don't really like it as much. But I do like this matchup. I think it's a matchup which could definitely test him. I think a lot of people have problems with the fact of, Paddy's popularity compared to the sort of, level of fighter he's fighting. But I can understand what the UFC are doing with him. They're taking their time and they're letting him kind of grow into the UFC. And I think that's wise. I think this is a step up in competition. I think a lot of people wanted to see him fight this man down on the bottom right, Ilia Topuria. But I do think that would be too soon for him, that fight. I do think Topuria would be a bit too much for him to handle right now. But Jared Flash Gordon, I think, is a decent matchup. I think Jared Flash Gordon is, you look at his sort of strengths, I wouldn't say he is elite anywhere, but I think what he has is a very good gas tank. He brings the pressure, and I expect him to put Paddy Pimblett on the back foot in this fight. If he doesn't do that, I do think it could be a tough matchup for him. I think if you look at both guys, Paddy is a lot bigger than him in my opinion, just looking at the two. And I think that also carries over with the sort of power and, you know, Paddy's ability to, you know, if he is able to maintain distance and Jared Gordon doesn't want to push the pace on him, I think he does have a little bit too much stopping power for him. I think if this fight gets to the ground, we're going to have to see Jared Gordon in top position. I don't like the sound of Paddy being on top of Gordon. I think that he could go for him pretty quickly. I think he's got a very good jiu-jitsu game. But what I think could happen is Jared Gordon could get on the front foot, make the fight a little bit dirty, get on the inside in the clinch. He's going to have to be careful there because we've seen Paddy go for, you know, so many flying triangles from those sort of positions. But I do think he can have a lot of success. I think he's going to test Paddy. And I think this one's going to go, you know, a little bit longer. I think we're going to see this fight in the second round. I think Jared ultimately is going to get finished. I'm going to go with Paddy Pimblett win. I think he's going to get some sort of submission or TKO a bit later in the second round. But if he can stay out of trouble, I wouldn't be surprised if he picked this one up on the cards. It is one of those sort of fights. But I'm going to go Pimblett. I'm going to go, he's going to knock him down. He's going to pick up a submission from there. And late in the second round. We move on to a fight which I absolutely hate. Robbie Lawler taking on Santiago Ponzinibbio. I just feel like this is bad matchmaking. Ponzinibbio is, you know, I guess in terms of his sort of stardom, especially in the Latin America sort of countries, he's a big name. And, you know, he went on a hell of a run back in the day in the UFC, beating the likes of Neil Magny, but since being off with injuries for some time, you know, he hasn't really had the rebound that he would have wanted. He's been in some close fights. He's picked up some good wins, but also a bad loss in there as well. Robbie Lawler, on the other hand, you know, he's just not the same guy he was. And you could maybe argue the case with Santiago Ponzinibbio that he isn't either. However, he's a lot younger and he's taken a lot less damage in his career. For me, Robbie, this could be one of his last fights in UFC. I think, you know, you look at his last sort of outings, you know, the win against Robbie Lawler, I didn't think he looked good in that fight. And I think the win, against Nate Diaz, I didn't think he looked good in that fight, personally. It was a very, like, slow fight. And even when Robbie was kind of throwing in combinations, he didn't look great. And I think he fought, what's the guy's name? Bam Bam. Barbarino, was it, last time out? It was, and he got finished in the second round. It wasn't a good showing for him, and he's just not looking at the level that he once did. I do think Ponzinibbio is probably going to get a quick finish in this one. I could see it, you know, 2 minutes into the first round. I don't think Robbie can take the damage like he once could. I'm going to go with a Ponzinibbio win. Move on to Darren Till versus Dricus du Plessis from South Africa. I think this is actually a really good fight. I like the fact that the UFC's made this one. Obviously, Darren Till not wanting to headline. He's always kind of had that role in, you know, when he comes back in fights, he's getting these sort of headliners. But I like the fact that he's only going to take a 3-round fight, and I like the sort of opposition. It's not someone that he's going to run through. It's a very tough fight. You look at Dricus du Plessis in the UFC, he's got 2 finishes and 1 decision. And it's against real good competition. He's been really impressive. I think on the feet, he looks scary. The win over Tavares speaks volumes, you know. A unanimous decision is a really good result. Tavares is a super underrated sort of fighter in the middleweight division. And, you know, I think Izzy got a decision against him back in the day. The wins against Giles are very impressive. So, you know, this isn't a guy that Darren Till's just going to run through. If Darren Till's going to win this fight, he's going to have to be, you know, at a good level. He can't be coming in with injuries and fighting under par. So I think it's a real tough matchup. And I don't know where to rate Darren Till at the moment in time. I think, you know, you look at his peak and he's a good fighter, and no doubt about it. I think you look at that Whittaker fight and he showed, you know, why he can be at the top of, you know, either the 170 or the 185 pound division. But this is a tough matchup, and I'm going to pick against him. I could see Till, you know, taking his time in this one, picking du Plessis apart and getting a decision. But I do worry for Till. His previous performances don't hold up, especially the Brunson one. I know he's injured, but it doesn't give me confidence in picking him. So I'm going to go with du Plessis. I'm going to go with a finish in the second round. I'm going to go with a TKO finish in the second round. Move on to an absolute sick fight. Bryce Mitchell in his camo shorts against Ila Tuporia. Man, it's a tough one. It says German on here. I always thought Topuria is Spanish. I know he's Spanish speaking, so maybe he's fighting out of Germany. But yeah, this is an insane fight. Bryce Mitchell, I think, has improved in his stand-up, but it's still largely dependent on getting the fight to the ground, and I think that's what he's going to have to do in this one. I think Tupuria's got a sort of style, where he kind of sits into some of his strikes and he's super quick and powerful. 12-0. I think this is a massive test for Bryce Mitchell. I think on his rise, he's had some fights which definitely suited him, like the Charles Rosa fight. But this one is a step up in competition, despite the guy being lower in the rankings than him. I think Topuria, if this was straight stand-up, he'd mop the floor with Mitchell. But I think the fact that I think Mitchell will get a takedown, and I don't think Topuria will be able to stuff them all. I think he could be in trouble. This is one of the hardest fights to pick on the card, in my opinion. I really want to pick Topuria because I'm a big fan of his sort of striking style. But I see Bryce Mitchell getting a takedown, and I don't know if I see him getting a finish per se, but I think he might be able to ride out enough time in top position to maybe pick up a round and then pick up another one. So I'm going to go with Bryce Mitchell. I'm going to go via decision 29-28. Move to the prelims. We've got some other fights here. Jairzinho Rozenstruik taking on Chris Daukaus, and this is an interesting one. Chris Daukaus, I think this is his first fight back, right, after the KO loss to, what was his name? Curtis Blades, yeah. And he was on a good streak before that. Obviously, 2 knockout losses in a row, one against Derek Lewis and one against Blades. But, before that, he was looking real good. And, he's being compared to a Tom Aspinall in the way he was fighting. Wins over Porter and, Olenek. Fucking hell, I haven't seen him fight in a while. But yeah, in terms of his style, he was being compared to Tom Aspinall, the way he was able to use his footwork, and as a smaller, sort of not coming in at the 265 limit, he was using his footwork and hand speed, and he was having really good success before his 2 knockout losses. Rozenstruik, on the other hand, I've never really been the biggest Biggie Boy fan. Obviously, he's got some tremendous wins in the octagon. I think the Overeem one is the one that most people think of, getting a knockout victory in the last sort of second. But since then, the fight against Ngannou was just a nightmare sort of fight for him. He got clipped early and the fight was over. Since then, he's picked up good wins, but I think when he comes up against the upper echelon of the division, he loses. I wouldn't say... I think one of the biggest criticisms I have of Biggie Boy is his output. He just doesn't seem to do enough, and he loses a lot of fights because of that. I think Chris Daukaus is a better mixed martial artist, and I think he's going to win this fight. I think the test is going to be in that chin, Has he gone chinny? Is he going to be finished easily? If Rozenstruik can catch him, can Rozenstruik catch him? I don't think he can. I think Chris Daukaus is going to have a lot of success from the outside in terms of using those sort of long straights. I think his footwork's going to be too much for Bigger Boy. I think he's going to outwork him. Potentially a finish, but I'm going to go with a decision for Chris Daukaus. Raul Rojas Jr. versus Jay Perrin. Don't know enough about these two guys. I'm pretty sure this is the real young guy, right, off the They're the Right Contenders series, so I won't give you a pick for that one. Edmund Shabazian versus Dalcha Lugiabula. I don't know how to say this guy's name, but I mean, Edmund Shabazian came in with a lot of hype, right, in the UFC, but he's coming off a defeat now to Imavov, which was an interesting fight and got finished pretty early. It's three defeats in a row for Edmund, and there's going to be those questions creeping into his mind. I think this is an opponent that on his day he should get the victory against. I think overall he's the more talented of the two, but I think what Dolce brings into this fight is that sort of that explosiveness and dangerousness. And after 3 finishes in a row, can Edmund take the damage anymore? These are all the questions I'm thinking about. I think this should be a fight that Edmund, if he's going to be someone who we see in the UFC for a long time, he's going to win this fight. But if he is going to be one of those sort of Sage Northcutt sort of flash in the pan, Dolce would get a win here and it'd be by knockout. Personally, I think Edmund's going to pick up a win. I think he's going to use his boxing. I think he's probably going to look to wear on the gas tank of Dolce, as it has been a bit of a weakness in the past. Chris Curtis versus Joaquin Buckley. This is my sort of fight right here. You know, looking at both of them physically, virtually identical in size in terms of the frame. It's a tough fight because I think Joaquin Buckley is a super powerful fighter, and recently we've seen him adapt more into MMA. He's been able to land takedowns of his own and have success in these areas. But I think the ultimate sort of thing about him is he's got that one-shot sort of knockout power. He does have that sort of Tyson style where he gets very low and he swung his head, you know, using head movement, slips either side, and that cost him early on in his career, but I think he is making those steps to be a better fighter. Chris Curtis, on the other hand, I think he's a guy who's going to come on the front foot, and I think he's going to look to pepper Joaquin Buckley with shots. I don't think he's going to want to give Buckley any space. I'm going to go with Chris Curtis' decision here. I just think he's got that sort of style where he's very active, and I think he's going to give Joaquin problems. I would like to see a Joaquin win. I think he's an entertaining fighter, especially inside the octagon. Billy Quarantino versus Alexander Hernandez, another banger. This one on the early prelims. Billy Q, I think he's going to get this one done. I think he's a very entertaining fighter, and you know, it's another question of Alex Hernandez. You know, came in, had success early on. I mean, the knockout win over Beneil Dariush has aged really well. It's unfortunate that his career hasn't, you know, ever since that Cowboy fight, it's been very up and down for him. And for me personally, I think about the fights with like Dober, where I think he's making a lot of, you know, mistakes in terms of the stand-up, certainly like crossing the feet and stuff like that, which you don't normally see, you know, with these high-level guys. And I think Billy Q puts it on him here. I don't think he's got that sort of fear of the power of Hernandez. I think he's going to get in the face of Hernandez. I could see him, this fight going down to the ground. I could see Hernandez shooting in, kind of panicky, getting stuck in that sprawl position, and Billy Q teeing off on him. I'm going to go with a Billy Q win here. I'm going to go with a second round TKO finish. This moves us on to Gustafsson versus OSP, which will be the last fight I cover on this card. For me, it's an interesting one, right? I feel like Gustafsson's been in a position where he's basically hung up the gloves on many occasions, but always seems to find his way back. It's been kind of disappointing in terms of his sort of performances inside the octagon. Last time out against Krylov, right? Gets finished early on in round one. And Krylov's a good fighter, but I wouldn't say that, you know, you look at peak Gustafsson, I don't think that, you know, Krylov could ever lace his gloves. And I feel that has kind of been that sort of thing with Gustafsson. He was on a terror right before the first John Jones fight, and I wonder how differently his career would have turned out if he would have got the nod in that one. OSP, what's he going to bring in this fight? I think the left head kick is definitely going to be one of his weapons, which Gustafsson's always going to have to be worried about. I think the explosiveness and, you know, raw sort of power OSP carries can finish anyone, and if he ends up in those bottom positions, he has to let go of any sort of guillotine attempt, because if OSP gets past the guard, it's night over with the Von Flue. But for me, I just think Gustafsson has got such a big speed advantage in this fight. And I think the footwork's big as well. I think sometimes OSP looks very heavy. He's a huge light heavyweight. And I think that will pay a factor. I just wonder, you know, once again, it's one of those fights where you've got to question what sort of damage can Gustafsson take now at this point in his career. And I hope it's enough, because I'd love to see him get on a bit of a roll and potentially push himself up in the light heavyweight division, because I think there's plenty of room up there. Once the glamour division of the UFC, it is getting back to the position where it's been a lot more competitive since James left. But I think it is missing a few more names up at the top. So I'd like to see Gustafsson get a win. Whether he'll get back to that sort of format he showed earlier on in his career, I doubt it, but I'd love to see it. Guys, let me know your picks for this, you know, especially just the main card in the comment section down below if you have made it this far. As always, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel. It is greatly appreciated. And I'll see you guys in the next one. I've got a couple videos I want to put up around Undisputed and EA Sports UFC 5. So I'll see you in the next one.